Hey, hey, mamas. Welcome back to another episode of Knit and Tell Fridays, which is a series here on the Knitting Mamas podcast that we have dedicated to talking about just a few kind of laid back things and including a knitting tip just for you each week. So let's dive into today's Knit and Tell. Hey there, mama. Welcome to the Knitting Mamas podcast. If you're a mom who's tired of feeling exhausted and longing for some well-deserved self-care and rest, you are in the right place. I know that finding time for yourself as a busy mom can feel like an impossible puzzle. But guess what? You don't have to compromise anymore. Hi, I'm your host, Nadine Medina. And just like you, I am a mom, wife, and also a happy knitter. Over my 15 years of motherhood, I have been on a journey to discover how to truly recharge without the guilt and the never-ending quest for perfection. The secret? It's all about progress, not perfection. By focusing on simple routines, natural wellness solutions, and the cozy art of knitting, I found the path to feeling whole and content. And on this podcast, I am sharing it all with you so you can do the same. Are you ready to find simple solutions to set yourself free from mom guilt, to take more time for yourself to truly rest, and to use your knitting skills for a mindful routine that creates space in your life so you can breathe easier? Let's take a deep breath, grab those knitting needles, and say goodbye to mom stress. Together, we'll create a supportive community that encourages you to prioritize self-care while juggling all your responsibilities. Sound good? Let's do this. Hey mamas, and welcome back. I am so excited that you're here with me on this Friday, the first Friday in September, actually. So hopefully you guys had a great start to this new month. I am your host, Nadine Medina, and welcome to this Knit and Tell Friday. Still stumbling over the little title that I gave it, but I thought it would be so fun because it's kind of like a show and tell, and I'm combining like a knitting tip every week, one that I have learned in the last few years or even way back when I first learned to knit with my grandma back in Germany. And I'm combining it with, just a few things that I'm currently loving, that maybe something I'm reading, something I'm knitting or crocheting. And yeah, it's just a little laid back chit chat here on each Friday to kind of ring in the weekend and get you ready in your mind for a weekend of relaxation and of knitting, hopefully. So today's tip, I'm actually literally doing the thing here in my hands with my knitting needles as I'm talking about it, just to make sure that I'm explaining it right. Because a little, like a knitting tip on audio can sometimes be a little bit tricky because it's such a visual art and craft. But I do have a knitting playlist for you on my YouTube channel that you can sign up for and that you can get for free. And all these tips are on that YouTube channel as well. So you can just watch the video if you feel like, oh, wow, okay, I did not quite get what she was doing, especially if you're a beginner. The beginners playlist on YouTube also has a bunch of beginners knitting videos. So it's like anything from casting on to your basic stitches, knit and purl stitch, casting off. It has a bunch of stuff on there if you're completely new to knitting. So this is for you. You just go to theknittingmamas.com/knitting beginners. I'm going to pop this link in the show notes and you can just click on it from there. Much easier than having to type it in. And let's get started with today's tip. So today I'm going to talk about last Friday, we talked about casting on, and today we're doing the same thing. It's just a bit of a different tip, but you can combine the two, which is really cool. Last week, if you didn't listen to it yet, I was talking about a fun way of making sure that you're having the right count, and that counting all your stitches that you're casting onto your needle isn't as daunting as it might seem when you have 20, 30, 40, 50, or even beyond 100 stitches to cast on, which can take a while. And making a mistake in counting can really mess you up, and then you have to start all over. Don't ask me how I know. And that tip last week really kind of helps eliminate that problem. So that was really valuable. Go back to listen to that if you missed it. Today, I am tackling another casting on tip, and it is in the long tail cast on, which, if you're not familiar with it, again, go to the YouTube beginner playlist, thenittingmamas.com/knitting beginners. So the long tail Cast on is like the most common cast on for knitting projects. And what it means is that you leave a long tail before you tie your initial loop when you start your cast on. But the problem that all of us are facing is, how long does the tail need to be? If I have, let's say I have to cast on 40 something stitches, 45, let's say it's 45. How long does my tail need to be? Well, it all kind of depends on your needle size, your yarn size, right? So it's not like, oh, it's so and so many inches every single time. It really comes down, it's very individual with each project. But there's a little trick that you can use to kind of gauge how long your tail needs to be so that you're not either running out of your tail before you're done casting on, which is the worst part or the worst scenario, or so that you're not ending up with a super duper long tail that you then have to cut. Not that big of a deal, but still annoying and a step that you can just skip if needed. But mostly it's because you don't want to run out of yarn as you're in the middle of casting on and you're not at your 45 stitches yet, because that's really, you'd have to do it over again. And that's kind of what we're trying to avoid here, right? So to do that, what you're going to take is your needle in the right hand and your yarn that you're about to cast on with in your left hand. You're going to place the yarn in front of your needle at the very base of your needle. So for example, if you have a needle with a band in the middle that is connected to the other needle, so it's a round needle, my favorite kind, which I talk about in other episodes, you would start right at the bottom where the needle becomes thin again and it attaches to the cord. Okay, so then you lay that beginning of the yarn right over that part of your needle. And then you are going to start wrapping the yarn around your needle, and you're doing that 10 times. So you kind of work your way up a little bit. It's funny because I'm actually trying to count while I'm talking. Not easy, gotta tell you. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So you wrap it around 10 times, and now you have a bunch of loops over your needle, and you should be right about at the beginning part of your needle at the top. And then you just let go of the beginning of the yarn that you held onto your needle at first. Let go, and now you have a rough measure of how long 10 stitches would be for your cast on. So whatever you're holding in your hand now, the measurement from the beginning of the yarn until your hand that is holding the yarn, that is how much of a tail you would need if you had to cast on about 10 stitches. Now, because it's not an exact science, I always say opt for twice as long, just in case. So I always add one extra length of this to my yarn before I start casting on. Now, this is for 10 stitches, of course, but if you were to cast on, let's say the 45 that we used as an example in the beginning, you would now go ahead and use that tail that you just measured, the first one, and measure out the same length 4 times, plus a 5th one, because you want to have more than 40, you're needing 45. And then I would add one extra one. So you want to measure out 6 lengths of this yarn. And that's the part where you want to start your loop for your cast on. And then there you go. You know how long your tail needs to be so that you don't run out of yarn and so that you don't, use too much yarn that is unnecessary for you for that particular project. So hopefully that was helpful. Once again, if you're like, what the heck? I have no idea how to even imagine that because I'm so new to knitting. I don't even know how to cast on. Go ahead and watch the beginner knitting playlist on thenittingmamas.com/knittingbeginners. All right. I am going to then now chat a little bit. Actually, you know what? I wanted to ask you guys a question because I was pondering this when I woke up this morning and I was thinking about, so this week, I think it was this week, Wednesday, I listened not to the entire thing because they're pretty long, but I listened to a little bit of Mel Robbins' podcast, which I really enjoy her. And she had such an interesting topic this week. It was basically her making the case for September being the real new year, the fresh start that we all are looking for, usually in January. And it was just such a fun podcast to listen to because she was really making a point and making a lot of sense too that I was able to relate to a lot because, September has this fresh start feeling for a lot of us because school is back in session. Summer is pretty much done with the exception of a couple more warm days. But the feeling of summer is gone because the pools are closed and kids are back in school and, everything is kind of starting to get back to normal, to routines. And it just feels like a good time to kind of jump back into routines, but also into goals, into personal goals, health goals, whatever that might be, back into a workout routine, back into a morning routine, which, by the way, we're going to talk about next week. And I'm so excited about that here on the podcast. But interestingly, as I was listening, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally relate to that. To that, I feel this like surge of renewed energy right now, even though my kids are home all the time, not just during the summer. But then I got an email from somewhere. I forget who it was, but I was just kind of skimming through the email, and it was almost the opposite approach. It had nothing to do with like a fresh start, but it was more like, oh, September is like so busy and it feels so crazy and it's chaotic because everybody is going back to school and the calendars are filling up again. And it was this like rushed kind of a vibe that I got from that email versus Mel Robbins, where it was just more like this is such a great time to revisit your goals and feel refreshed and not chaotic and not all those other things. So I was just laying in bed this morning wondering, where are you on that spectrum? How do you feel about all of this? Like for me, it might actually be a little bit of both, given that my children are home all the time, all year round. So there is not this like, this complete change of schedule or of how things are going in the house that can happen when you go from a full-blown summer with kids at home and everything's kind of off and the routines are off and all that stuff to, everyone's back to school, work is normal, the mornings are different and all that stuff. It can have that a real change of season feeling versus, for me, they're always home. So it's always chaotic. It's not like, now my house is clean again. It's always a mess. But I still feel this renewed energy because, of course, during the summer, we have a more lax schedule and things are routines are off. If there are even any routines, I try to keep my morning routine up because I just love it so much and it does so much good stuff for me, which I talk about in previous episodes as well. But, it's not as intentional, maybe. Maybe I won't use the word intentional because it's still pretty intentional to get up earlier during the summer when, people might not need you immediately, especially the teens. But it wasn't as extensive, maybe that's the word. When, during the school year, I try to do more things during my morning routines versus in the summer. I try to kind of take it a little easier then too. But I do notice if I don't do it, it just has a negative impact on me and, on like the whole thing, my physical, my mental health. And I'd rather continue my morning routine throughout the summer too. But next week, we're going to talk about morning routines and some tips for the getting back into routines as well. But yeah, I would love to hear from you. Maybe in our Facebook community, that would be a wonderful place to chat about this. Which if you're not in there yet, come and join us. You can find it at bit.ly/knittingmamas, so bit.ly/knittingmamas. Come join us. It's free. We hang out in there. We talk about knitting. We talk about life. We talk about stress relief. Other than knitting, obviously, that's one of the first, activities that I recommend in order to combat your stress and your mental issues, and not issues, but like mental challenges that we all face, negative thoughts, things like that. And, help each other out, getting away from social media, trying to put the phone down and pick up the needles. So join us in there and we can have a conversation about how does September feel to you, mamas? Is it invigorating or is it chaotic? Or is it somewhere in between, like for me? Okay, meanwhile, I'm going to give you just a quick update on my current knitting project. It has not changed since last week. It's still the same project. What has changed is the progress. So I'm pretty excited about that. And if you remember, it is the landscape shawl or wrap, whatever. It's a triangle scarf. I call it what you want. They're all adorable. And it is 5 colors that are knitted in stripes down. So it's a large triangle. So the colors are in stripes, but of course triangle shaped. So it's really cool. And I just can't wait for it to be done because it's kind of hard to see the whole thing as it's on my needles because it's all bunched up because it's like 200 and 40 something stitches at this point because I am increasing by 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches every row. So I've been increasing 4 stitches every row since I started, and I am on row 153. So it's quite a bit. And that's why it's taking me also quite a while to finish this, but I am super excited that I am now on the last color. And let me walk you through the colors that I have. So I started with like a mustard yellow, then an olive green. After that, it's like kind of like a cloud gray, so a very light gray. And then it's a color that I think is actually called lavender, so easy to imagine. And then the last one is just a bit of a darker purple, so darker than this lavender one, to finish it up. And then you add tassels to it. I have not decided the color of the tassels. I figured I would decide that once I have it all stretched out and it's laying in front of me. And then, I'm going to just hold all the colors to it and see which one looks best. But yes, I'm on the last transition. So I'm hoping maybe this weekend I can finish it. What's funny is that the stripes with every color actually became smaller or slimmer, I guess. But it still takes the same amount of time because you're knitting that many more stitches because of the increases. So it's a super fun project, though. Like I mentioned last week, I'm thoroughly enjoying it, especially because of the transitions. They're not hard, but they are a little bit like tricky. So I had to look it up. But once I looked up how to do the stitch and I was in it, it was super fun to do the transitions. So that's a real plus. I'm going to link up the entire kit, which is from Lion Brand and from our friend Alexi at Two of Wands, who has been a guest on the podcast before this year. This is her design and the yarn is from Lion Brand. So you can buy it as a kit, or you can, I think, just grab the pattern from her blog. So I'm going to link both up and you can use whatever colors you like. But she does have like 15 different color combination that she created based on themes that she came up with, from a mountain retreat to the one I'm making, which is lavender fields, to like a more of a Caribbean inspired one with like teals and yellows. And it's just, they're all so gorgeous. I had such a hard time deciding, because they're all really lovely. I went with the lavender fields because I have a very big connection to the south of France. So this had to be mine this time. But I might just make it in another colorway because it was just so very creative. I really loved it. And so that's what I'm focusing right now. As I mentioned before, I am working on multiple projects at the same time. But I want to focus on getting this one done. So I decided to not pick up any of my other ones. And this one is fun enough to where I'm not bored. As you know, when you get bored with the project, just start another one. Who cares? You can just have as many as you want going. That way you never feel bored or like you don't want to pick up your knitting because you're like, oh, it's the same thing. It's the same stitch. It's the same color, whatever it is that makes you feel that way. Don't worry about it. Just start another one. Make it fun again, right? Where you're like really loving picking up your needles because you know the benefits of this craft. And what it also helps you with is just to ditch your phone. Let go of the phone, let go of the social media, pick up your needles instead. It makes such a difference. It makes such a difference, I promise. All right. So last but not least, the book I'm reading. I'm currently finishing a book in German, so I can't really, I can recommend it, but I'll link it up in the show notes. I guess the majority of the audience is probably English speaking, so I don't know how beneficial and fun it would be for me to recommend a German book. But it is a series that I started about almost 10 years ago, and this is book 11, I think. It's a little bit of a cozy murder mystery that takes place in the south of France, so it's like totally up my alley. And the lady, thankfully, comes out with a new installment of these once a year. And this is my little summer indulgence. So I'm almost done with that one. I think I'm going to finish it today, probably. And then I'm going to dive into a new book, which I rented from the library, called The Woman in the Window. So let me know if you guys have read that one. I'm going to link that one up as well. I can't tell you yet if it's good, but I heard that it's really great. So I'm really excited about starting that one. And that is it for today's Knit and Tell Friday. I hope you guys enjoyed. Join us in the Knitting Mamas community. I would love to see you over there and continue the discussion. Once again, it's bit.ly/Knitting Mamas to join us over there. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. Hey mama, I hope you've soaked up some great ideas from today's episode. Remember, a happy mom makes for a happy fam. If today's chat hit home with you, it would mean the world if you could leave a 5-star written review on iTunes. Your review will help other moms discover our community and embrace guilt-free self-care. Also, if you're scrolling through Instagram, why not snap a screenshot of this episode for your stories? Don't forget to tag me at The Knitting Mamas so that I can shout you out on my page as well. Plus, that way we can stay connected and spread the self-care magic. Oh, and have you heard about our cozy Facebook community? It's a guilt-free zone where we share relaxing routines, essential oils, and knitting adventures, and so much more. Come join us today at bit.ly/knittingmamas and let's unwind together. Until we chat again, take care, mama. And remember, looking after yourself is not selfish. It's essential for that balanced life. Catch you soon right here on the Knitting Mamas podcast.